WWE 2K18 will be the 6th consecutive video game to host my ongoing universe mode. And since I've been making videos for so long, I have noticed a recurring pattern, just something that you're bound to run into as if you want to make a universe mode, a continuing universe mode that travels over the course of multiple games like myself, then there are the same general issues that you're going to encounter time and time again as the games reset. One benefit to the games resetting is that it's a way to kind of, I guess, revitalize the traffic, like the potential traffic that you could receive, because everyone's looking for new content on the new video game, and so that's typically when the majority of my new fans will hop onto the series. They'll be brought in by the new game hype, so that is a benefit. But then there are just certain setbacks every time that the game resets that I wanted to kind of discuss, because I mean, this is something I've encountered for a while, and for new content creators who might just be starting a universe mode, or who might be looking into making a long-running universe mode like I've made, like Brennan Plays has made, like MerceYT13 has made, or even Delzinski, just all the creators who have done it, they've experienced the same issues that I have. So the obvious first issue is that the rosters will change. You're going to have superstar cuts, you're going to have new superstar additions, and that is both a benefit and a detractor to potentially the quality of a series. For me, for example, the new game obviously gives me a pool of new talent to choose from. So then, over the course of that next game, I can figure out when I want to have all these new superstars debut, and it'll keep the roster fresh, which is a good thing. However, the roster cuts, it all depends on who gets cut, because there are certain instances where when I need to write somebody out of my series, it's pretty easy. Damian Sandow, for example, he was a really easy write-off. Even though I had wanted to do more with the guy, I hadn't really put him in like a feature role, like he was never in the spotlight. So writing him off and kind of making it a significant moment for Curtis Axel, it wasn't too difficult for me to pull that off. Whereas you could have a superstar like Ryback, for example, who was my World Heavyweight Champion and going into the new game, and then I had to quickly get the belt off of him because he wasn't I could have used a call. I could have used a created wrestler because he wasn't on the in-game roster. But the issue with that, especially if you're starting out a universe mode right off the release date, you're immediately jumping right into it. The issue you're going to find with created wrestlers is that the superstars that are available immediately, they're not very good. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, because people are just kind of rushing them out to get them up on community creations as soon as possible, so that way everybody can use Jeff Hardy or whoever. I know Jeff Hardy's a popular one. I guess nowadays the more relevant would be CM Punk, seeing as Jeff Hardy will probably be DLC in the new game. But the real quality created wrestlers that are gonna kind of last throughout the rest of the cycle, those take a lot longer to make. So you typically won't see those come out until a couple of weeks, maybe even a couple of months into the game's release. And even then, new creations are still going to continuously be made. And there are certain instances like where in 2K16 or 2K17 rather, just for an example, I used a CM Punk created wrestler and a Cody Rhodes created wrestler, and they were okay, but they were kind of the best that was available at the time. Whereas a couple of months later, I was able to pick up better looking ones because people had more time to make them, to put them together. But then the issue with that is the wrestlers are going to look visually inconsistent, because like when I made the change between the two Punk and Rhodes created wrestlers, it was pretty obvious. They look very different when you compare them side by side. And that might not be a big issue for some people, but for me, I value that visual consistency, especially when you consider that every other superstar who's still active on the roster, when they transfer over to the new game, you're not going to have any issues with them, because the models are still going to look, I mean, even in like the new game now where they've updated the graphics, so the models will look different, you're still going to obviously recognize that they're the same person. They're going to have basically the same features. There's not going to be too much to differentiate between them other than attire and some subtle tweaks to their designs. Like Dana Brooke, Sasha Banks, for example, they might not have looked that great in 2K17. They'll look better in 2K18, but they'll still, like, even the 2K17 models, they still looked like Dana Brooke and Sasha Banks. With a created wrestler, there's only so, like, you do have some limitations to work with that kind of hold you back, and that's just the nature of the game, because for the actual on-disc roster, or the actual in-game roster superstars, 2K has all this technology to, you know, scan their faces and make everything look as realistic as possible. With a created wrestler, like, you're going off of pictures, as opposed to actually, like, you're not going to be able to physically scan the person's face, at least if you want to do a real-life superstar, no, even then, they don't give you that option to, like, scan faces or whatever. You're going off of pictures for that type of thing. So you're not going to have that 3D depth to the faces. So they're always going to look a bit off compared to the active members on the roster, the people who are actually in the game. And no matter how great a created wrestler looks, not to say that created wrestlers can't look good, because there were a lot of really good ones, especially in 2K17, and they only continue to get better. But it takes time to do that. So then you have to figure out, well, how are you going to book for that superstar in the interim? Do you hold them off? Do you put them aside? Put them on the shelf maybe for a couple of months until you can get a good-looking created wrestler? Or do you jump right off the bat at the very first one you can find and then run the risk of things looking visually inconsistent, but at the same time you can still book that superstar until like, you don't have to worry about putting them on some sort of hiatus, as it were. You don't have to take them off the roster for a bit. You can continue using them right off the bat, which is important, I feel, but at the same time, like, it depends. There's just a lot of issues. For example, like with Ryback, I could have brought him in as a created wrestler right out of the gate so I could continue his World Heavyweight title reign if that's what I wanted to do. But then it's a matter of weighing your pros and cons. Do you care if a superstar looks one way? Do you care if a superstar looks inconsistent, even if the created wrestler that the person has looks kind of just for the sake of being able to continue using them in the storyline? Or do you just get rid of that superstar entirely? Or do you just hold them off until you can get a created wrestler? Do you get them injured or something? And there is a benefit to this roster situation where the new game gives you an excuse and forces you to trim the fat, as it were. Not only are you spicing up your roster with new additions, you're also spicing it up by getting rid of the extra superstars who don't really do anything on your show. The superstars who are just kind of there. Like, I know, going into WWE 2K18, I've got certain superstars. The Vaudevillains, I wasn't really doing anything with them. So I was able to get rid of Simon Gotch, and now I can kind of rebrand Aiden English to whatever I'd want him to be. Alberto Del Rio is basically just a jobber at this point in the series, so then he can just go away when the new game comes out, and I don't even have to worry about it. And that'll be the case for anyone. You're gonna have superstars who you don't really utilize, superstars that you just can't find time for on the show, and when the new game comes out, and if they've been released from the company, or if they're in the instance of Blake and Murphy, where they just haven't been on TV for a while, then you don't have to worry about figuring out a clever way to write them off if you really don't want to. You can just have them fade away. Or if it's a superstar who's kind of prevalent, but you want to get them out of the picture, then the new game gives you an excuse to rush their exit, to find a way to injure them, and in doing so, you can use that superstar's exit to put over someone who's going to still be in the game. So like for me, I used Simon Gotch. I had Kevin Owens destroy Simon Gotch backstage. He put him through a table, Gotch is done, and it continues to build up Kevin Owens as this monster. And in the past, I used Damian Sandow to put over Randy Orton. It made Randy Orton look like this devastating superstar who, if he snaps, if his anger just gets the better of him, or if somebody really gets under his skin, he can end their career. So that's what I did with Sandow. I had Orton punt him in the skull. It made Orton look good, and it got rid of Sandow, which, I mean, Sandow was going to be leaving the game anyway. So at least by using him in that capacity, that's probably the best way you could do it, is by having that superstar get some sort of like debilitating injury at the hands of one of the other members on your roster, because then you make that superstar who does the injuring look like an absolute beast. I could go into more detail on that subject, but I've already done so in numerous other videos. So instead, let's move on to my second point, which is a bit of a less important one, some people may say, definitely a more easy to overlook thing, and that is the move sets. Every time the new game comes out, you have to reconfigure the move sets, because obviously there's no feature to just copy over move sets from the previous game, which, hey, if I had to make a WWE 2K18 or heck, 2K19 wish list, because I doubt it'll be in 2K18, I would want the ability to copy over move sets, but from one game to another. Now this could be just take it from the last game, or if they really wanted to go the extra mile, make it so that you could copy movesets from previous games, like on that console. Like, obviously there'd be some limitations to it. So if I wanted to take a Superstars moveset from WWE 2K15, maybe I could do that. But realistically, if you can just take it from the previous year's game, I think that's all you'd really need, because then you could copy a moveset from 2K15 to 2K16, from 2K16 to 2K17, and so on. And then at that point, you don't have to spend all the extra time finding the specific moves. You don't have to, like, screen cap your, like, the pages from the previous game and then figure out where that move is in the list of moves, and then go through and assign each move accordingly. And there would be, I guess, some issues potentially with that feature. Obviously, if a move is removed from the game, then you wouldn't be able to copy that over, but then I feel like there'd be a simple fix. Just, if a move is no longer in the game, just default that to whatever the default move might be, whether it's like a suplex or a neck breaker. I think it's a simple, at least I think it sounds simple. I don't design games, so I can't say for certain, but I don't see that being too difficult to do. Like, maybe the copying, I don't know exactly how the logistics of it would work, but I think it would be a cool feature, because you have other games like, let's use Madden as an example, where you can port over an entire roster from that year's NCAA football game, you know, the college stuff. So if you can port over that class, if you can port over those rookies into the new game, then I feel as though it wouldn't be too much of a stretch to want 2K to implement a similar feature to be able to copy movesets from previous games. Then when you get into stuff like arenas and custom superstars, maybe that'd be a bit trickier, because then at that point, you're also moving over custom logos and other assets. But with a moveset, it's just, like, there's no extra elements brought into it. You can't, at least at this point, I know in 2K18, I think you can do create a finisher, but at this point, you don't have to worry about moves like that. And okay, let's say if you had to make some limitations, you had to cut something, don't let people make copy over creative finishers, which even then, I still feel like that would be a fairly easy thing to do. Like, the difference here is that if you're copying over movesets, it's really just a list of stuff that's already in the game. Unlike, like I said, with Create Arena, Create a Superstar, where you're copying over entire assets. Which, even then, I still feel like 2K could possibly pull off something like that down the road. But for me, personally, it's the movesets that I want to be able to copy over, just because going back through and adding the moves to each superstar year after year after year, it definitely gets tedious. I know you only have to do it once a year, but when you're someone like me, where I've made so many changes to certain superstars' moves, and then it's just a matter of, because then at times I forget what their default moveset even was. So then I have to really look through it and figure out, well, what were all these new moves that I added? And then fixing them, putting them back in. And it's just the process. There's no easy way to do it as it stands right now, because you have to either take like a picture beforehand or some sort of video showing what that superstar's moveset is. Like the way that I do it now, I have to open 2K, here's what I did for 2K17. I'd have to open WWE 2K16, go into a superstar's moveset, and go through each individual thing, and what I would probably do, I think, was record a video for it. And then, once I did that, I'd have to open WWE 2K17, which is, again, I'm talking about last year, this is what I did. Open 2K17, and then, after that, I'd have to pull up my video, and then look off both screens, and put each move where it belongs. And it's just a slow, tedious process. And I'm not saying, like, it's inconvenient. And I feel as though it's something that could be easily fixed with just a a simple feature where you could copy that type of stuff over. And I know I talked about movesets, but this would really apply to any custom content. If you made a custom arena, you'd have to go back and remake that. If you made a custom superstar, you'd have to go back and remake that. And of course, in the instance of downloaded superstars, which I know a majority of people would use, I myself really only use downloaded superstars because I'm not talented enough to make my own created wrestlers that, like, of actual real life superstars. So in that instance, then you'd have to wait until the same people who made one guy would have to make the other thing, or wait until just somebody makes a really cool looking version of that superstar. But even with these issues, there are certain ways that you can get around them, at least depending on what the issue is. The obvious thing would be, well, just don't get the new game. Just continue doing what you're doing on the current game that you have. And that works. I know if you're making YouTube videos like I do, if you stick to the old game, you're probably not going to get as much traffic as you normally would, but it all depends on really how you value, I guess, the cost versus the benefits of such a decision. Like for me, I have recently kind of started tossing around the idea of just sticking to one video game and running through with that, because I book a lot of my storylines so far out in advance that, say, if Seth Rollins were taken out of the next game, that would completely cripple, some of the biggest plans I have going into next year's WrestleMania. That would just completely cripple it, because I've lost Seth Rollins. Or if you take out, like, a Kevin Owens right now, who has been on this warpath, what am I gonna do then? Just rush him out of the series, have him lose his title and get injured by some other guy? It could work, but in some ways that feels kind of forced. There are just certain detriments to that. I've considered, just because of how far out I book my series, I could focus that, then I would be able to focus on an unchanging roster. I don't have to worry about who's going to be cut in the next video game. I don't have to worry about what new additions are going to be brought in. And because at that point then, I guess I could bring in creative wrestlers if I really wanted to bring in any new characters, but often I treat my universe mode like a story, and in most stories, you don't have a ton of characters being brought in all the time, all over the place. Like in certain anime, they'll do that. Like if you've got Naruto for example, and you've got this big tournament arc, then you're gonna bring in a bunch of new characters. And I'm not saying that bringing in new talent, new characters is a bad thing. It's definitely a good way to perhaps re-energize your series, get some more hype surrounding it. But at the same time, when I try to focus on, like, developing guys, showing their progression throughout a series, like, for example, I have this whole Outcast storyline going on with Curtis Axel. And, well, not just Curtis Axel, but it's all the superstars involved so far. And it's supposed to be a storyline of growth, of progression, showing these guys go from the bottom of the card, because that's their whole foundation, is they're at the bottom of the card. They were these mid-card jobbers. If you can even call them mid-carders, they might have even been below that. They weren't doing anything, and it's their slow rise as they try to move up the card. They're trying to make it to the top, and in that sense, it's trying to figure out what makes a main eventer. What sort of hurdles do these superstars have to overcome? Right now, they've got the strength and numbers thing, but is that going to be enough to get them to the top? And once they get to the top, if they get to the top, can they stay there just by this numbers game? But if Curtis Axel was not in WWE 2K18, or Heath Slater or Bo Dallas, really any of the members of the Outcast, say Sin Cara, for example. I just introduced Sin Cara into the Outcasts, and let's say, well, he's not in next year's game, figure it out. And then at that point, it'd be like, well, what was the point of introducing him? I just put him in the faction, and now I find out he's not going to be in next year's game. It was pointless. So I don't like moments like that where I can't, like, I start to take a story in a certain direction, and then something happens and it just dies immediately. Because then at that point, it's just pointless. You're going to look back on it in history and be like, well, what was this? This accomplished nothing. And the extreme version of that would be, say I have this 6-month storyline building, because for certain storylines, I like to have a really slow burn. That's some of my favorite feuds in the WWE have been the really drawn out, not drawn out, because that implies that they weren't deserving of the length that they got. But take a look at Shawn Michaels versus Triple H, for example. That feud was kind of off and on for like 2 or 3 years, and in my opinion, that was one of the greatest storylines WWE had in that era. Seth Rollins versus Dean Ambrose could have been a really good one that WWE had. I wanted it to be longer, but instead they just kind of had a couple of matches, and then Bray Wyatt jumped in and it was kind of weird. And I felt like, yeah, they still revisit the Shield stuff, but it's not the same. It's not like they're continuously kind of building to a Seth Rollins Roman Reigns or a Dean Ambrose Roman Reigns match. It's kind of off and on. They'll do their own thing and whatnot. It's more of a storyline out of coincidence than it is a storyline by design. Like, these significant story beats that they'll hit, they're usually just not maybe coincidence isn't the right word, but it's not following like a strict plan. Like, if things happen, then it happens to benefit the story that they're going for, then cool. If it doesn't, well then let's just pretend that it didn't happen. So if I had done this big Outcast storyline only to find out like halfway through, like I haven't even gotten to what I suspect would be the big payoff for it yet, it's still kind of developing, but like halfway through it, Curtis Axel's just taken from the game, what do I do at that point? Like, yeah, I could just get a creative wrestler of him and make that work, but then at that point, I don't know, it's a matter of what would I do at that point? He would look different. It's just a matter of weighing all these different options depending on how much each specific aspect holds value to you. And then, of course, there's a bit of an issue with all the new fans being brought into your product, is that if they're jumping right in the middle of just anything, like for my series where there's a bunch of storylines going on and they all have different beginning and end points all throughout the calendar year, then at that point they're going to wonder what the heck is going on. They're going to have no clue what's happening, and then they got to figure out where to catch up. So that's the thing about my series, it's not easily accessible. Like, I recently made that video about where you should start my universe mode, so I've given a list of potential start points, but at the same time you're not going to be getting the full experience, the full context behind everything. But then if you wanted the full context, you'd have to go back and catch up on 4 years of material, which might not be the easiest, especially considering my early universe mode content is garbage. And because it's wrestling, it's not like a story. Like, if I wanted to go catch up on One Piece, all 1,000 whatever chapters, episodes of One Piece, then I could clearly go back to the beginning of that series and watch everything play out through that timeline, because there's a clear narrative chronological order that it goes through. There's a clear timeline to follow of events, and I could go from beginning to end with that. With universe mode, because it's wrestling never ends. There is no set end point, so you just gotta kinda, things will just start and begin, that's the exact same word, they'll start and end wherever. New superstars will come in. Like, at this point, a lot of my universe mode originals have either left the series, or they're coming close to where they will be forced to leave the series. There's gonna be guys like John Cena and maybe Randy Orton, guys who are probably gonna be in like every WWE video game for eternity now, because they're just, that's just who they are. They're just the big names in the company at the moment. And it would, like, I mean, you've got guys, think about it, a Stone Cold Steve Austin, has he ever not been in a video, like a WWE video game? There might have been maybe a year or so that he wasn't, but I know a guy like The Rock is in there almost all the time. The Undertaker has been in there all the time, and I don't see him getting taken out because he's such a huge legend. Triple H has been in basically every video game. Shawn Michaels Triple H has been in all of them as far as I remember. Now, I'm not going to say like the No Mercy stuff or whatever, which he might have even been in them, but I'm talking like, from my experience, like the SmackDown, like SmackDown Here Comes the Pain, wherever the beginning of that SmackDown lineup was, pretty sure he was around for that. And then just moving forward, he's just been there. Same with a guy like Shawn Michaels, The Undertaker, John Cena and Orton were even around in those early days. So there are certain guys that you're never really gonna lose, but say someone like Rob Van Dam, I had to finally write him out of the series in 2K17, because he came back in 2K16 after I had kind of written him off in 2K15, but he came back. But then 2K17, I was completely done with him because he wasn't in the game. And I didn't look like he was going to come back, but then he came back in 2K18, so it's like, what the heck, man? I just wrote you off last year. Why are you coming back? Same with Batista. With Batista, I had plans for him, and then they pulled him from 2K17, and so I thought, well, okay, I'm just going to abandon these plans and get rid of him as soon as possible. And then they announce him in 2K18! What the heck? What do you want me to do? 2K, Ukes, what do you want me to do? What do you want me to do with my storylines? Can I have these guys in the game or not? Make up your mind, please. I think this has gone on long enough. thank you for joining me for this discussion. It was rambly, I went all over the place. Hopefully it made some sense. It was more of like a rant at this stage. Maybe I'll just put rant in the title. But anyways, thank you for joining me for this thing. And until next time, keep on YouTubing.